I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today is an exciting day because this is the first time I've ever driven a British racing green car on this channel, and that's my favourite colour. And the car that's wearing it is actually not too bad either. This is the current gen Mini Cooper S, a fun little hot hatch built by a BMW subsidiary Mini in Great Britain. And under the bonnet there is actually a relatively potent engine. Now, in the price range that the Cooper S plays in Australia, there's lots of really good cars. A Golf GTI doesn't cost too much more, an i30N is about the same price, so it's fairly competitive out there in terms of dynamics. But obviously, the Mini does have something that none of the others really do, and that's this classic heritage-driven shape. And even though the Mini is actually perhaps not so mini anymore, it's quite big and quite tall here around at the front end, it's still a pretty cool looking car in my eyes. Do you agree? Let me know down below. And while you're down there, make sure you subscribe to Chasing Cars so you never miss any of our highly detailed Australian car reviews. But what we should do is jump inside this classic 3-door Cooper S and see what life is like in this interior. Now, one thing Mini haven't done is they haven't done away with the retro theme inside. BMW have kept the Mini's really classic interior ever since they took over this brand more than 15 years ago now. It's actually been that long since they've been in charge. This is still a British car, however, and there's absolutely no denying that it's a Mini here in the cabin because virtually everything you look at is round, much like on the original cars going back decades. You get this fantastic Mini steering wheel. It's really beefy, nice red stitching here. Now, this car has the John Cooper Works pack, which does change some of the styling outside the car and also little things inside like this slightly meatier steering wheel. I wouldn't do it. I would just leave the Cooper S as it is and let it be itself. If you want a JCW, it's not a massive jump up to that from this car. Now, this particular Cooper S is not highly optioned. We've got the normal sport seats with a mix of cloth and leatherette. They're quite nice. Little quilting pattern on the adjustable leg extender. We have the smaller version of the two available screens. This one is 6.5 inches, has standard wireless Apple CarPlay, which is fantastic. There are very, very few brands out there with wireless CarPlay, so that's good to see. You also have a little color screen in front of you, which shows you a digital speedo and a few very limited other functions. But you do have stuff like dual zone climate control, which is nice to have, and fast charging USB ports as well. Plus, there's actually wireless charging right here in this cool little adjustable armrest that sits between the seats. Now, in terms of practicality, it isn't too bad. We've got two cup holders ahead of this self-centering shifter here. We've got the automatic. It's $2,700 more than the manual. I'd personally just get the stick. Another tray ahead of those cup holders and very, very small door cards. You don't buy a Mini for practicality, you buy it for fun. But it's not just fun in here because actually the materials all feel relatively plush and upmarket, so you are feeling like you've spent a little bit more money than some of this car's mainstream rivals. Mini do sell a 5-door version, but the 3-door is the one that I like. So we're going to check out just how much space there is in the back. So don't mind me leaning over here. Push this seat out of the way, hop out and do the same over my side, and as gracefully as possible jump into the back row here. Now I can pull this seat back into my driving position, and how much space have I got? Well, as you know, I'm 6 foot and I've got just about another inch of headroom above me, and my knees, look, they are up against the seat in front. Got okay toe room. There's just 2 seats back here. There's actually 3 cup holders, which is quite nice to have. Perhaps you feel like a cool drink and a hot drink. There's no dedicated air vents, so you'll have to rely on air coming from up front, but obviously this isn't designed for having people in it all of the time. Instead, it's basically just an extra parcel shelf or perhaps very occasional transport for other passengers. Now, egress is okay, as those front doors open a little bit wider than normal. And here around at the back, the name's Mini. That describes how much boot space there is. So I haven't even been able to cram in the big Chasing Cars suitcase like usual. Just got the carry-on, and you can see if I take that out, it's a pretty small boot. But look, if you're buying a small, compact, city-sized vehicle like this, you're not really going to expect that much, are you? It's definitely enough for a weekly shop. or for a couple of school bags if you're using this to transport very young children around. But if you need more room and you want a Mini, you'll probably need to look at something like this brand's much larger Countryman. So, what's the Mini Cooper S like to drive? Well, there's lots of good things about this little hot hatch and some things that I'd really like to see Mini improve in a future update. But to start with the good things, firstly, there's the engine that goes into the Cooper S, and that's a 2-litre turbo 4 putting out 141 kilowatts of power and 280 newton meters of torque. Now, those numbers aren't huge in the context of modern warm or hot hatches, but here, this vehicle weighs under 1,200 kilos. So those sorts of figures are actually pretty decent, and they're enough to get this little thing along very smartly indeed. It'll do a 0 to 100 sprint of 6.7 seconds, and it feels about that quick out on the road. It's actually in the mid-range when you have the car out on a really good back road where the Cooper S can feel genuinely fast point to point. I do find, however, though, that around town there's a little bit of throttle lag and there's a little bit of gear shift lag if you leave the 8-speed box to its own devices. That can be a little frustrating with this vehicle. So I think there's a little bit more tightening up that could be done in that department. However, when you flick the Cooper S into its sport mode, because we have the adjustable drive modes here, and especially if you use the gearbox in sport or you drive it through the paddle shifters, you know, it can actually be a pretty nimble and agile experience. Now, speaking of that gearbox, it's an 8-speed dual clutch unit. In fact, it's such a good dual clutch that most people won't even notice that it isn't a regular automatic. It does a really nice job of banging through the gears quickly and in a refined manner. There's very little dual clutch weirdness to be found here. The engine also sounds good. If I flick down a couple of gears, there's a nice zesty little growl from the twin outlets at the back, and there's center mounted exhaust, which I really like. So, nice engine, good gearbox. What about the chassis? Well, that's pretty sweet as well. This is my favorite Mini body style, the classic 3-door, partially because it's so short. It's only about 3.8 meters long, and that means the chassis just feels absolutely tiny, and the entire car will rotate around you if provoked, and you don't even have to provoke it that much. In fact, if you find a corner with a tightening radius and you just put in a little bit more lock, the Cooper S will happily bring its tail around really safely and predictably, and the stability control system is delightfully tuned to allow that to happen without the brakes clamping in on you too much. This is a car that I think flatters the driver. So the handling is pretty cool. The one big thing though that I really think needs some attention is the steering, because unfortunately the Mini has this heavy treacly steering that doesn't really change as you cycle through the drive modes that much. It never feels that light or darty through the steering wheel. Instead, the Mini requires really too much effort to turn, especially in town, which doesn't make you feel like you're driving one of the smallest and lightest hot hatches on the market. I find it a little bit tiring and uninspiring actually, and I really do think that a full rethink of the steering feel is required. I know that the classic Mini did have heavy steering, but it was also heavy and fast, and in the Mini it just isn't fast enough, especially in sport mode where I feel like the steering actually requires even more effort, takes on more resistance. Yeah, it's a shame. Something like a Peugeot 308 GTI would be right at the other end of the spectrum, or a 208 GTI in this size class with super quick steering that's also nice and light. I think that Mini could look at something like that as the other extreme and hopefully end up somewhere in the middle. Another thing is the ride quality, which, as you may be able to tell from a bit of camera shake, which is unusual in our driving shots, it's pretty unforgiving. This is entirely possible to use as a commuter car. I just wouldn't really want to, because around me there's a lot of urban imperfections where I live, and the Cooper S sort of bangs in and out of those. That said, this one does have the JCW suspension. I would definitely not tick that box. I would just let the Cooper S be the Cooper S. Either way though, I think the suspension could do with being a bit more supple and a little bit more forgiving. And I understand that like the purpose of a Mini is to be a bit of a throwback, and hot hatches, you know, never used to be comfortable, but it's kind of like now they are. Now they can be comfortable and also offer blistering handling. See the Civic Type R, for instance, which does have quite a nice ride quality, and there's really no excuse for it being this bone-shakingly hard. That said, I know some of you out there will be looking for that and more of an original hot hatch experience, and therefore the Cooper S, especially with the JCW suspension tune, may be exactly what you're looking for. That said, I think that it's definitely worth test driving if you're out there shopping for a nice quick hatch for around 40 grand. There's heaps of good cars in this segment, and the Mini can actually work out to be relatively cheap if you don't go overboard on the options. Safety is just okay, so you've got city speed AEB, and you can basically option up the rest. This car is very light on the options, but you can't get stuff like blind spot monitoring or rear cross traffic alert, which is a bit of a bummer. So those are my impressions of the Mini Cooper S. I really think it's hard to not like this thing. It's a fun looking car, it's pretty good to drive, it's awesome to sit in, and it still has these beautiful heritage looks, all suiting that British Racing Green paintwork perfectly. So yeah, I like it. If it was a heart-driven decision, the Mini Cooper S, I reckon, would be in my driveway with a manual gearbox. The only problem for this car is there's lots of different competitive options for this price. Something like a Golf GTI is, ends up costing about the same, but is much more practical and actually a bit faster as well. So let me know down in the comments, if you were shopping for a hot hatch, would a Cooper S be on your list? While you're down there, please make sure to subscribe to Chasing Cars so you never miss one of our videos. Like it, share it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.